please join me in welcoming the former Secretary of the Treasury, John Snow.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to be here.
Great to be here. Well, we'll get right to it, John. And may I call you John, or do you prefer Mr. Secretary?
No.
If you want Mr. Secretary, we can do that.
I think just plain John's pretty
Just
good.
plain John. Okay. Well, just plain Frank will do that too. So I'm sort of looking over the landscape a little bit, and I'm thinking about you because we're glad you're here and all of that. And I'm thinking 9.6 unemployment, $1.3 trillion. $13.6 trillion debt, according to the debt clock just down the street, $1.3 trillion deficit, foreclosure crisis grinding on, China's currency at unsustainable levels, the G20 unable to do much about it. So you miss your old job?
Well, a former Treasury Secretary and I got together recently, and his comment to me is, John, isn't it nice to be a former Treasury Secretary?
If you were in there in the middle of all this, and we just had numbers out today, 2% for GDP growth, 2%, which is better than the previous quarter, but it is still anemic. It is still weak. It still means a long haul on getting the jobs back to where they need to be. What should we be doing now? Are we doing the right things?
Well, clearly we're not, because 2% growth is not only anemic, it's really pathetic, given the fact we've just come through the biggest downturn in modern economic times. Now, financial downturns are worse than normal inventory excess downturns, but this is just unacceptable economic performance for the American economy. Put it in perspective, Frank. If the American economy grows at 2%,
right,
and continues to grow for,
and it was 1.3%, I think, the previous quarter, right? So we're
but just
even at 2%.
Stick with me, and we grow at 2%
right.
for the next 10 years. You know what the unemployment rate will be in 2020?
What?
12%.
12%.
12%. So the problem we've got is we need growth rates well in excess of 3%, 4%, in order to clear out this downdraft that is keeping people away from getting jobs. So we need substantially more growth than we're getting. I've never seen a gap between potential GDP and actual GDP as large as the one we have today. I think the Washington Post had a major story on this a couple of weeks ago, but it's really staggering. So something is fundamentally wrong, and we may have an election that produces new leaders that may have some new answers, but clearly we need to get the American economy.
Well, if you were there now, what would you be doing? What would you be advocating?
Well, a number of things. First of all, you don't want to increase taxes when you've got the gap between potential GDP on anybody. You don't raise taxes when you've got a serious downdraft on the economy. You also have to show, I think, to keep faith with financial markets. The leaders need to show a commitment to long-term fiscal responsibility. And there's only one way to have long-term fiscal responsibility is to deal with the demographic issue that's driving Social Security and driving Medicare, because Social Security and Medicare are becoming the budget of the United States.
So do you buy into what Carlos Slim was saying and tell people to work till they're 70 or 75?
I think that's a piece of it.
Really?
I think that's a piece. Well, I'm not sure 75, but you don't have to go to 75. If we could fix Social Security with fairly modest extensions of the times people work. So
to what?
Like 6 months a decade.
From where it is now?
From where it is today, 6 months a decade, and you make a dramatic impact on it. In fact, you almost bring it into balance. But the real issue is Medicare. I mean, Social Security, I worked it and got a lot of arrows in me trying to, back in 2005, trying to move the Congress and the American people to accept the idea we needed to do something on Social Security. But the numbers there are small. A small increase in the age of retirement, small increase in taxes fixes it. It's not big. The gap isn't that big. The mind-boggling gap is the one on Medicare. as more and more of the baby boomers retire. And of course, as Carlos said, as you get older, there's a higher incidence of healthcare issues, rising healthcare costs, more people demanding healthcare, a new bill that puts more people into the healthcare system. How do you rein in the cost of healthcare, which if we don't watch out, are going to be 20% of GDP and then 25% of GDP. If anything is growing faster than GDP, guess what? It becomes GDP.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And we have healthcare growing at 3, 4, 5 times the rate of GDP.
And what would you
growth.
be doing about that? Because
well, I
been
think
tried too,
we
and
have
it continually runs into political.
Yeah. You know, I'm intrigued with what's going on in the UK now, where political leadership has shown it makes a difference. Cameron and his colleague from the Liberal Party are turning the clock. You know, they're really making huge strides, Thatcherite-type strides, in fixing the fundamental problems of overcommitments, spending that isn't sustainable, and so on. I mean, we can do that.
But they're cutting across the board?
Absolutely.
And you think that's what should be happening in this country?
We've got to rein in the growth of spending. It isn't.
But how does that get to Medicare, Jim?
It gets to Medicare through a variety of ways. One is looking at the recent legislation and seeing whether we can really afford it. Mm-hmm. I think the new Congress, I hope they would take a look at that. And that's not wholesale abandonment of Medicare, obviously, but slowing the rate of growth of Medicare. And what's wrong with the healthcare system? You know, the fundamental problem with the healthcare system, we've got a lot of people who are experts on it at the GW community. Most of us never confront the cost of healthcare when we go to see that doctor or go to the hospital. We're looking at a price for the healthcare services far below the true marginal cost of providing it. Well, if people are consuming and not seeing the real costs, what happens? Overconsumption. I remember doing a talk show, one of those shows you used to host, and walking out of it.
Occupational hazard, John.
Walking out of it, I'd made this case in the show, and walking out, the very distinguished commentator from the media said to me, you know, Mr. Secretary, you may have a point there. And I said, what? What do you mean? What do you agree with me on? You don't agree with me on much. He said, well, you know, the point about health care, he said, I went to get my physical last week, and at the end of the physical, the doctor came to me and said, you know, you're looking great. You're going to live another 30 years, 40 years. You're in great shape. But I neglected to give you 2 tests. I'm not sure those 2 tests make much difference, but, you know, you're not paying for them. Why don't you take them? And he said, you know, I thought to myself, why not? He mentioned the name of his employer. He said, they're paying for it, not me. Well, that's endemic. That's endemic to the healthcare system. We don't see the costs. It doesn't affect our budget. We don't think it does. It does ultimately through Medicare and taxes and so on, but we don't see the costs, so we overconsume. We've somehow got to change the dynamics of the healthcare system.
So let me ask you about dynamic on the other side of this policy issue, and that's what the Fed is doing.
Right.
Or trying to do. This thing we call QE2, which others call printing money.
Right.
What do you make of that? Is that going to have an impact? Because we've been doing this for a long time. We've got interest rates, it seems, almost as low as they can go as it is. This is trying to put money into the system.
Yeah. Well, what's the mandate of the Fed? The mandate of the Fed is promote full employment with price stability. We have unemployment at 9.6. As I said, at current growth rates, it's going to go higher, not lower. It's going to be with us for a long time. And we have the specter of deflation. You know, we have inflation rates in the United States now considerably lower than the Fed target at 2%. So you're sitting there at the Fed and you're saying we've got this big gap between what the American economy should be doing and what it is doing. We have this huge overhang of unemployment. We have inflation running below our targets. We've got a mandate to act, and QE2 is the tool available to them. Go out, buy paper, buy treasuries. Hope that by buying treasuries, you flatten the yield curve some. You give a little spurt to the equity markets. You create some wealth effects. And as you get wealth effects, then people begin to consume more. I think the Fed is it's understandable that they would be looking at QE2 given the state of the economy and given their mandate.
Right. And the effectiveness of that, what comes of it? Nobody
knows. We don't know. I wish I knew. The idea is that we'll put the money out there. The people will have the money. They'll use the money to go buy stocks and other assets. Those assets will go up in value. And as the equity markets and other assets rise in value, household wealth, which has come down because of the recession and the global, in our great panic of '08, that household wealth has come down by trillions, that household wealth will start to rise again. And as household wealth rises, people spend more. We know that ratio. For every dollar of increase in household wealth, people spend 4 or 5 cents. So you get, but that's the idea of this. Whether it will work, Frank, I think is a question mark, and a lot of economists are debating it and have doubts about it, and are saying, well, maybe a better course would be this or that. Many are calling for fiscal policy stimulus rather than monetary policy stimulus, but the after TARP and after the apparent ineffectiveness of the big stimulus package that came in the early part of the administration, I don't think there's much political wind behind fiscal stimulus.
You say the ineffectiveness of the stimulus package. So what the president is arguing and what the Democrats are arguing is that this stimulus package saved jobs, created jobs, and at a minimum averted the next Great Depression.
Right.
Politically, it's very difficult to get credit for what hasn't happened.
That's right.
But do you agree that this country, and some of these activities started in the Bush administration, by the way, that
Sure.
we dodged the bullet of the next Great Depression? And should Obama and the Obama administration get some credit for that?
Well, nobody knows. You're asking imponderables whether if you hadn't done what you did, you would have had
how bad
something.
It was, though, right?
It was bad, and I supported the policies of stimulus. I wish the stimulus had been better directed, though. The stimulus we got seemed to produce far less than the effects we should have. And you've got a public now, according to the polls, that isn't happy.
Right.
Isn't happy. They aren't happy with the
deficit.
They aren't
happy. Did we dodge that big bullet?
Well, yeah, I think we dodged 1930, 1931, 32. We don't have unemployment at 25%, but 9.6 with another 7 or 8 of effective unemployment. We're at 16 or 17% effective unemployment rate in the United States.
We're at 15 or 16 effective unemployment.
Effective. Well, effective means all those people who left the workforce and aren't looking for a job because they're disaffected. Those people in part-time jobs who want full-time.
Who are underemployed.
Or underemployed, and those who've vacated the workforce. You put them in on top of the 9.6, and you're up at 15, 16, 17.
And if you'd been in that job when we saw the mortgage meltdown, and we now have phenomenal statistics in this country. 20%, 1 in 5 mortgages in this country is underwater. That's almost unfathomable. I keep coming back to this question. What could we do about it? What could we be doing now about it, if anything? Or does this just need to shake out like so many other markets?
Well, we got into this problem because we underpriced loans to prospective homeowners. And the government was complicit in that, our government, by the role of Fannie and Freddie, which supplied extraordinary liquidity into those markets, following directives from Congress to promote home ownership. But we overdid home ownership. We now know that. We put a lot of people in homes they couldn't afford. And by doing so, we put dynamite in the whole financial system, and it blew up. This was a housing crisis. This really was a housing crisis. And the housing crisis moved to be a financial crisis, and the financial crisis migrated into being a full-blown recession with the worst economic performance we've had since the Great Depression. This is the aftermath of that. All those people in homes they couldn't afford are now facing foreclosures. And many of them are turning the keys in, saying, my mortgage is worth more than, I got a bigger mortgage than the value of my house. They're turning the keys in. And we have a glut of housing. And we got to, if we're going to get our housing markets working again, we've got to clear out the excesses. That's why talk of a national moratorium on foreclosures is just totally wrong-headed. And I was pleased to see the administration, despite a lot of political pressure, because everybody's with the homeowner versus the bank. But the administration stood up, and I think they should have credit for it, for saying, no, we need to fix the documentation issues, but we also have to let the market clearing process work in the housing markets.
This is the GW Global Forum. So let's talk about the global economy and globalization for a while, because that's something you know and you've been intimately involved with. As you survey the world now, as you look at this global economy, what do you see?
There's a new acronym that I've got to use. I don't like it, but I've got to use it in order to answer your question. And it's we've all heard of the BRICS, Brazil and Russia and India and China and so on. Everybody knows about them, these engines of growth. There's another acronym, which is HICS, H-I-C. And the HICS are the other side of the BRICS. The HICS are the heavily industrialized, heavily indebted countries. Now, who are the HICS? We're a HIC. I hate to say it, but we're the leader. We're the biggest HIC. But there are a lot of other HICs. In fact, most of the G7 are HICs. And the world is really divided into two camps. The HICs that are showing slow growth, high unemployment, current account deficits, low savings rates, high consumption and borrowing from the rest of the world. That's how we got into this mess. And then the BRICS, well, they're off sailing with high growth, good growth in jobs, good growth in output, exports exceeding imports, so they got capital surpluses, and they're driving the global economy. It used to be the U.S. was driving the global economy in the G7. Now it's the BRICS. And we need to adjust, and they need to adjust. I mean, there has to be a grand adjustment process here, and that's what Tim Geithner went to the G20 with, saying...
When you say adjust, define that.
The United States, in simple terms, we've lived beyond our means for too long, we and the other HICs, and we're going to have to pull in our belts. We're going to have to find a way to live within our means. And part of living within our means, going back to Medicare, is we've made commitments to future generations that we can't afford.
You don't think we can keep those?
No, I don't think we can. I don't think we can afford it.
And the BRICS need to adjust.
And the BRICS need to adjust in a counterpart way. The BRICS need to develop their domestic economies. They got to absorb their own savings by having higher consumption rates, putting in place social networks for old age retirement, for pensions, and for health care. The reason people in China save at the rate of 50% of household income, 50% of household income is they're facing 30 years out, 20 years out, retirement without pensions and without health care. So when you talk to the Chinese leaders, and I was here in New York yesterday talking to a number of them, they're really focusing on how to deal with this problem, and they're strengthening their social security system. They're encouraging domestic economy to grow. They're trying to make their domestic economy stronger and not be so reliant on exports. And that's going to mean they don't have this huge glut of savings.
But can they move quickly enough to make the adjustment that needs to be made?
And
there's also the whole issue of their currency valuation in this too, right?
Right. Well, and currency is part of it. I mean, when you have huge current account surpluses, normally your currency goes up in value. And counterpart, when you have very large deficits, your currency historically tends to go down. In both theory and practice, that's what happened. Their currency hasn't risen as much as most commentators think it should. But if they absorb those savings and use them domestically, they'll get the same place. And I think what the G20 is trying to find out is what's a path here to keep this adjustment process going. It's beginning to work, Frank. I mean, in the United States, we're, check the numbers, we're saving more than we used to. We're paying down credit card debts, and we're paying down car loans, and we're not consuming as much. And in China, they are spending more on the domestic side, and their capital account surpluses aren't growing at the same rate. They're still too large, and our savings are still too low, but at least we're heading in the right direction. And I'd much prefer to see dialogue through the G20 and the leading countries than the counterpart to it, which would be currency wars, trade wars, tariff actions, and so on.
But there was dialogue at the G20 recently, and your colleague and the current Treasury Secretary, Tim Geithner, didn't come home with what he wanted to come home with.
Maybe not all he wanted to get, but he focused on the right issue. And the G20 is focused on the right issue. And the IMF is now in the game, focusing on the right issue. So I don't despair here. I think there's the right focus. People know what the problem is. They all know what the problem is. And all across the globe, countries are trying to take actions, I think. And in China is taking action. That's the positive.
Are you an optimist on China? Because there's some very interesting camps on China, of course. One is that they're going to go green. They're going to increase their domestic consumption. Their currency will adjust with some intervention and of its own weight. Others say no, that China is so focused on 7+% growth per year, because that's the number they have to hit to maintain their national harmony, which they speak about, that they're going to be self-interested and far more focused on what's happening in the short term.
I don't think that is where they're headed. I really think they're backing away from this excessive reliance on exports. They're still going to have exports. They need to create 25 million jobs a year to absorb the people coming out of the provinces and not have people rioting in the streets. I mean, that's a huge number. But they now know they can do it with greater reliance on the domestic economy. It's not going to be one or the other. It's going to be both. But the export sector, I think, over time will be less emphasized, domestic sector more emphasized. Over time, that will help correct these imbalances. I think they understand the problem. Think of their problem here, in a sense, if you're the central bank governor and you're trying to sustain a currency value, what does the central bank do? You're under an obligation to go out and buy dollars. Well, you're out there buying dollars. You're buying dollars with yuan. The supply of yuan is continuously going up unless the exchange rate is at the target you want. That means you're continuously increasing your money supply. What does that mean? It means you're not in a position to really apply the tools of macroeconomic policy to control inflation.
I have the cards here from some of your questions, so let me turn to a few of those, and we'll weave them through. Because while we're on the point, do you think there's anything different the Obama administration could have done to improve the current economic climate the country's facing? This is from a current MBA candidate.
I think the stimulus package itself could have been better designed. It looks like we wasted a lot of oomph in that package. I think the climate with business could be a lot better. You talk to business executives across America, uniformly, they feel the administration isn't on their side. They're not getting positive vibes from the administration. It seems to me a council between the president and the business leaders of America, in which the president says, I'm with you guys. You read me wrong. I'm with you. I want to see you do well. They don't think that. I think we also have a huge overhang of uncertainty in the economy, of pervasive economy uncertainty that business people feel about how's health care going to play out. If I hire somebody, am I going to have huge new obligations?
Well, they have the health bill. They should be able to answer those questions now.
But they haven't implemented it. They don't have the rules and regulations out. Then you've got the tax. What's going to happen with taxes? Right. Are we going to go with cuts or with continuation of the Bush or not? Then you have the big one is EPA and greenhouse gases and extensive growth of regulation perceived by business that's causing them to say, why would we ever build a plant in America again? So there's this pervasive uncertainty as a result of lack of clarity on the rules. And then finally, Dodd-Frank, some of you are bankers, Dodd-Frank, we have much higher capital requirements in the face of an already deeply stressed banking system, and bankers are saying, what do you want me to do here? Where am I going to get the capital? You want me to lend? Where am I going to get the capital to be in a position to lend? And Dodd-Frank is spawned 2 or 3 years of regulatory implementation as well. So the business people are saying, we are just living in a world of uncertainty.
Right. Next question here moves to one of your other lives. As a former railroad executive, how do you see the future of railroading in the United States?
I'm with Warren Buffett.
That's always a good place.
I'm with Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett, you know, purchased the Burlington Northern, paid a huge price for it, which he says was a bet on America. I think it's also a bet on the global trade system continuing to operate well, because railroads are now really right in the middle of the global trade system. They handle the containers coming into and out of the United States from India and Asia and Europe. And it's a bet on long-term prosperity of the American economy and the global economy. I think and the equity markets today are giving high marks to Warren Buffett's sagacity.
How about on the passenger side? Because one of the things that we're seeing with the high-speed rail investments through the stimulus package by the administration is a bet that this is a smart infrastructure investment. You agree with that?
I think more investment in high-speed rail in selected corridors in the United States makes sense. I don't think we're ever going to see a high-speed train network across the whole country, because air service is just...
It's just such a big country.
Yeah.
But in the highly congested and populated corridors.
Northeast.
Can we make money out of that? Is that always going to be?
Well, I don't know that. No, I don't think the prospects of making money. I don't think Carlos Slim would invest in that as a way to increase his net worth. But there's a social value to investment in railroad infrastructure, reducing congestion, dealing with environmental issues, and not having to build more airports. Mm-hmm. So I think you can make a good case for investment, well thought through investment in high-speed rail.
Let's talk politics for a couple of minutes. What do you think the congressional outlook is?
All I know is what I read in the papers from your former colleagues.
Well, it must be right then.
Must be right, yeah. Yeah, I remember in the summer of '08 when they were telling us that those wizards that McCain had no chance and that Hillary Clinton clearly would be the nominee, right?
Wow.
To be the nominee. Anyway, there's only one poll that counts, and that's the poll that's going to come at the election itself. But it seems to me, given the state of the economy, given the mood of the country, great worry about the deficits, great worry about jobs, great worry about prosperity, and the feeling that we got from the Obama administration, from the Congress, something we didn't bargain for, it's time for change again. We had change in '08. I think this is 2010 is a period where there's momentum for change. I think we're going to get change. I think the polls are probably right.
The Republicans are going to take the House?
I think the polls are probably right. That's odds-on favorite right now.
You think they'll take the Senate?
No, I don't think so. That you have to run the deck to get the Senate. You got to take virtually every one of them. I don't think they can run the deck.
So but Speaker John Boehner.
I think John Boehner and the whole team. I mean, I know those people. Dave Camp, House Ways and Means. Paul Ryan at Budget. These are good people.
Eric Cantor. How do you think a return to divided government will affect the way things get done? Or because some worry about stalemate, others say actually quite the opposite. That there's a prospect that we can really get something done.
Well, I mean, the first thing it seems to me, you heard me earlier on this. The first thing it seems to me we have to do is avoid tax increases when you're in a deep downturn. I think they will start there, and I think they'll be successful. And I hope they couple it, though, with a commitment to long-term response on these deficits that aren't sustainable. Because if we don't do that, Frank, if we just cut taxes and don't deal with the deficit, the financial markets are going to react terribly. And we've got the combination now of these big deficits, and we've got QE2. And QE2, with big deficits, is a frightening prospect to financial markets because the conclusion is, what are those guys doing? Are they going to monetize the debt? And if you monetize the debt, then you're just setting the stage for inflation, you get inflation underway and inflationary expectations underway, and then you've got then the yields on the treasuries are going to go way up, and we're probably into another downturn.
Have you been to a tea party? Do you
Not
take sugar with your tea?
Yeah, I like neighborhood tea parties with friends and neighbors.
Go ahead.
The tea party, it gets criticized a lot, and there are some excesses in it. But it seems to me, throughout American history, the democracy works when people feel disaffected with their leaders, when they feel disaffected with the products of the legislative and executive processes. They support insurgents. And what is the Tea Party but insurgency writ large?
So do candidates like Rand Paul and Christine O'Donnell help the Republican Party?
Well, if they win, they do.
You think?
It looks like one will win and one won't. Yeah, I think they do. I think they put energy into the Republican Party. The Republican Party had become sort of, I'm Republican and been for a long time, but became sort of stodgy, became sort of establishment, sort of lost its roots, lost touch with small government, lost touch with the things that made it, with fiscal prudence, lost touch with the things that defined it. And I think that we'll see how it goes. But with the Tea Party coming on, Republicans embracing it, maybe the Republican Party will get back to what I thought was the Republican Party.
Another question from the audience here on the corporate side, which is where you come from. Great New York question. How will proxy access affect the corporate governance environment?
Well, it's a huge and troublesome issue. It depends how it gets implemented by the SEC and what further steps it might take. But I think it's a dangerous element in the corporate world because if proxy access goes too far, people get on the board who are not directly interested in maximizing the going concern value of the corporation, but will pursue other objectives. And I'm old-fashioned in this. I like the Delaware statutes that say boards are required with a fiduciary duty to pursue the financial interests of their shareholders. Their job is to maximize the going concern value of the enterprise. Well, proxy access, who's behind proxy access? A lot of people who seem to have a different agenda, an agenda that's not tied to maybe good agendas, maybe things we might support, but not through the corporate sector. I mean, if and whose objective is not seeing the corporations do as well as they can to create shareholder value, but do other things. That, I think, is dangerous because it's fundamentally in conflict with what corporations are all about.
Another question, back to the global side again, what are the prospects for increased partnership between the United States and China in the coming years?
That's a good one, a really good one. The fundamental answer is they'll be partners with us when it's in their interest, and we'll be partners with them when it's in our interest. And what we recognize now, I think, as we haven't in the past, is we each have an interest in seeing the other do well. When China does well, it creates opportunities for our markets. Talk to General Motors, talk to Caterpillar. They want to see they want to see China do well. China wants to see us do well, in the sense that they want to see that investment they want to see us continue to be a market for them, and they also want to see our treasuries continue to hold value.
They're holding a lot of paper.
Because they're holding an awful lot of paper, which is the capital for their banks. There's a huge mutuality of interest, but in the end, China's going to do what China thinks is in its interest. We're going to do what we think is in our interest, and the hope is we can demonstrate to them and they can demonstrate to us that the things that should be done are in both of our interests, so that their increasing focus on their domestic economy is in their interest, in our interest. Our increasing our own savings rates, reducing our deficits is in our interest, but it's also in their interest because we make the global economy less vulnerable to these risks of blowing up.
John, I want to go to, in the few minutes we've got left, to the really sort of big picture here. You know, when I first came to Washington, and when I had when I was covering the White House, I was covering the Reagan administration. I was traveling with the president. I remember very clearly the day in December of 1982 when we got the word that the unemployment rate had topped 10%. And it was the first time we'd gone into double-digit unemployment like that since the Great Depression. It was a terrible time. We were going through the Rust Belt. We were talking about Japan Inc., which was buying up America. We had come off of the Carter years when Jimmy Carter and others had talked about the age of limits. And there was this sense that at least many felt that we would not see our children do better than we had done. That conversation has returned now. And what I'm wondering is whether you think that we just go through these cycles and we come through these cycles, and as we did before, we will surely prosper, or is there something fundamentally different at work here? And are we, especially when we overlay issues of change in the global community, the Chinas and the Indias, the rise of the rest, as Fareed Zakaria refers to it, seeing a fundamental shift in America's position in the world?
I think it's all in our hands. That is, the rest of the world, the BRICS and others, are going to continue to grow and prosper and have a long run ahead of them. That is not a threat to us, in my view.
The rise of the rest.
The rise of the rest is not a threat. What's a threat to us is that we don't take the actions here in the United States to deal with our fundamental problems. And the biggest problem is the deficit going forward and living beyond our means and making promises we can't live up to. And unless we deal with that problem, we're confronting catastrophe. Now, I'm with Winston Churchill. You know what Winston Churchill said about America? They always get it right, always, after they've exhausted every other possibility.
Well, we're right through them, aren't we?
Right now, we're exhausting the other. But I mean, I'm encouraged by Cameron.
You're encouraged by?
By Prime Minister Cameron. I mean, political leadership
but they've got a parliamentary system.
Different.
It's a totally different system, though.
Well, then you mentioned Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan took an agenda to the country. He had a lot of problems getting it adopted, but he got it adopted. Margaret Thatcher, who the same thing. Political leadership makes a difference. And at some point, the American people say, we want new leaders.
But Obama's gotten his, Reagan took his agenda to the people and got it adopted, but we had months of 10% unemployment. Reagan's numbers were worse at this point in his presidency than Obama's are.
Yeah, and there were always lags. But I think the difficulty this administration faces is that the American people look at what they've been doing and feel they're too detached from the lives that people are leading. They're too detached from the stress and difficulties and that the administration itself focused on things that, while important, healthcare and global warming and so on, weren't the central issue. The central issue, as Bill Clinton said, is the economy stupid. It is the economy stupid.
As we've talked about all these things, last question here, John. What is the role of a university in the middle of all of this? We have all this research we do. We have all these young people who come through our doors. What influence do we have? What role do we play in setting this national agenda and addressing these very challenging problems?
On any number of levels, a critical role. Forums like this can serve a part of the thought process that helps shape how we think about the world. The young people coming through the university are the leaders of the future. I remember after a cabinet meeting, the Secretary of Education came over to me and said, well, how's the economy doing and how are we going to compete in the future and where are we going? And I said, Rodney, you're going to have a lot more to say about that than I am. because the quality of the education that we're producing is really our future. It defines our future. We used to say that demography is destiny. I think education is destiny too.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.